One of the reasons I love commercial real estate in the United States, especially apartments, is because you can force the value of the property to increase. If the property is found and opportunities are identified, decisions are made, and they're made into action, the value of that commercial real estate can increase substantially without completely depending on the market, which as an investor is super exciting because you're not just sitting around waiting for the market to improve. There's things that you can do to make that property worth a lot more, which is one of the great things about commercial real estate. So let's begin with some quick definitions. Let me define residential and commercial real estate the same way banks do. Residential real estate consists of properties of 4 units or less. Most common are single-family homes, which are all over the country, but you can also have things like duplexes where there's 2 units or 2 families living on that property, or triplexes where you got 3, or quadplexes where you got 4. These are considered residential properties, and lenders finance these properties with the same kinds of loans that you or I would use to buy a home ourselves. Now, commercial real estate includes all kinds of different properties. You could have industrial, office, self-storage, and apartments. For an apartment to be classified as commercial real estate, it needs to have at least 5 units or more. Now let's talk about how the value of residential and commercial real estate is identified. Now, if you own a home in this country, you probably know how this works. Basically, residential properties are valued by comparing them to other similar properties nearby, called comparables or comps. These are properties that are somewhat nearby, they have the same number of bedrooms, same number of bathrooms, roughly the same square footage. This is how residential real estate works. Let's look at this example here. Say we own a duplex, and you can see it's got 2 families that live there, and we want to sell that property, and we got to find out what the value is. Well, what a realtor will do is they'll start looking at properties that are similar to that one. So they may pick that one, that's a duplex, and then maybe the one across the street, that's a duplex too, and the one behind it is a duplex. And they're roughly the same square footage and number of bedrooms, etc. And what they're going to do is they're going to look at the value of those properties and what they sold for if there was recently. Say the first one's $330,000, this one across the street, $345,000, and the one behind us, let's say, is $370,000. The realtors are going to say, you know what, your property is worth, let's just say they say $350,000. Now, that's pretty much the value of your property. Can you do much to improve that? Not really. You may say, well, wait a second, I remodeled my bathroom, and it looks amazing. No other house has that. It's like, well, yeah, but that doesn't really increase the value of the property that much. So there's not much you can do to affect the value of your home when you've got this kind of an approach. Frustrating, right? So what else could you do to increase the value of your residential property? Well, the other factor is time. I mean, real estate tends to appreciate over time, but that takes a long time. And it tends to appreciate. It doesn't mean it always does. It depends a lot on the market and what's going on. And so, while it tends to do that over time, it's not a guarantee. And there are other factors that increase the value of the home. Potentially improvements in the neighborhood, like maybe the schools have improved, or maybe a brand new shopping area was built nearby, or perhaps the crime went down over the last years. You know, those are all things that can also positively affect the value of your home because of what's going on in the neighborhood. But the big point here is that there's not a whole lot you can do to make the value of your residential property go up. There isn't much. I just want to interrupt real briefly to ask you that if you're finding value in watching this video, please click the like button. Doing so helps YouTube know that this is valuable content for others to see as well. So thank you. Back to the video. Now let's look at commercial real estate. Sticking with the apartment example, again, it's 5 units or more, and let's look at how this works. The key thing to understand about valuing a commercial property is that it's valued as a business. This is so important because this is what makes commercial real estate so special as an investor. How does it work exactly? It's figured out with some very simple math with some terms that might be new to you. The value of commercial real estate is figured out in a very simple formula. You take the net operating income, or NOI, divided by the cap rate, and that gives you the property value. Now let's look into the definitions of these two terms because they might be new to you. Let's first start out with net operating income. Net operating income, or NOI, is exactly what it sounds like. It's the revenue minus the expenses. What does revenue look like in an apartment complex? The biggest thing is rents that come in from the residents, but there are also other types of revenue, like maybe money that comes in from the coin-operated laundry, for example, that the residents use. Or perhaps there's covered parking, that there's a charge to use that parking, or even pet fees. Those are all different types of revenue that an apartment complex can get, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. And what are typical expenses? Well, if it's a larger property, they probably have on-site staff, like some office personnel, some maintenance that roams around the property fixing things. So that payroll expense is an expense. You also have things like the maintenance and repair expenses, the materials you have to buy to fix things. You've got landscaping, you've got marketing, you've got insurance costs, and maybe even utilities if you're paying utilities on your property. And one of the biggest expenses of all is taxes. So it's revenue minus expenses that gives you NOI. So if you were paying close attention, you probably noticed that I did not mention the mortgage as one of the big expenses. Now, why is that? Isn't that the number one expense? Well, it is. We want to compare our property to other properties. Some properties have a very large mortgage payment, while others might not have any mortgage because they're paid off. So if you include the mortgage in there in the profitability, then you're not really sure how profitable the property truly is because the mortgage is kind of in there messing it up. So it's kept out to make it easier to compare properties. Now let's look at the cap rate. Now if you take this equation and move it around a little bit, you switch property value with cap rate. The cap rate equals the NOI divided by the property value. You may say, but wait a second here, don't I need to know the cap rate to get the property value? That's true, but this is a way to show you how the cap rate is calculated. It's called the capitalization rate. The cap rate represents the value trend we'll see in that market, and it's very market specific. One way to calculate the cap rate for the area is to look at recently sold properties and divide their net income by the value that they sold for to get the cap rates that you're seeing. And if you average those out, you'll get a rough estimate of the cap rate. But it's not quite that simple because while you can find the sale price of a property that sold recently, more than likely you're not going to know what the NOI is. So what else can you do? This is where experienced real estate investors talk to local commercial brokers that know the market really well. They're likely going to know what's going on with cap rates because that's really important in their business. So asking a local commercial real estate agent is probably going to get you pretty close to what it's like in that market at the moment. So if I go back to the equation the way it was before, you'll see the property value equals NOI divided by cap rate. Now let's look at an example. Let's assume that you've got $400,000 worth of income in a year and $300,000 worth of expenses. So the NOI is $100,000. And say the cap rate is 10%. You divide NOI by the cap rate and you get the property value of $1 million. This example shows you the power of how commercial real estate is valued because anything you can do to increase that $100,000 number is going to dramatically increase the value of that property. Notice that we're not looking at the number of bedrooms or bathrooms or units like in residential, nor are we looking at the neighborhood that it's in, although the cap rate does include kind of a market sentiment in it. What we're really looking at here is profitability. That's what really matters. Now, let's say, for example, we want to make some improvements and we add an amenity that increases our revenue by $10,000. And let's say our expenses stay the same. Our NOI would increase by $10,000. And dividing that by a 10% cap rate gives you a value of $1.1 million. Now, increasing the profitability by $10,000 gives you a $100,000 increase in your value. That's incredible. The same thing would happen if you were to save $10,000 on your expenses. Your NOI would go up by $10,000 and your value would go up by $100,000, assuming a 10% cap rate, which is pretty incredible. The big point I'm trying to make here is that as an owner of a commercial real estate property, you're free to improve that profitability as much or as little as you'd like, and thus increase the value of the property with the actions you take. That's not the same as residential real estate. With that, you can make improvements to your home, but you're really not going to change the value that much. Oh, and the dollar amounts we're talking about with commercial real estate are much larger. Now, it isn't easy to increase the profitability of an apartment complex, let's say. It takes finding a good property that has potential, identifying opportunities to increase the profitability, doing work to make those things happen. But it's what I love about commercial real estate, which you can't do with residential. And the values are so much larger that it's very attractive as an investment. So I hope you've learned why this one factor makes commercial real estate such a great investment. With the right team in place, you look for a property that has a lot of potential for increasing profitability. You purchase the property, you make the improvements, and results in a much more valuable property in the future, which you could decide to sell or keep. So you may be wondering, what other benefits are there to invest in commercial real estate? Well, I created a video on that, which you can check out right here.